identify it. It was passed to me by the programme officer in redacted form. At the time, the inquiry wasn't in session. I'll summarise the matter that it raises as follows. It says there have been possible offences of deliberate killing and unlawful possession of dead bats at Wolvercock Tunnel. It goes on to say was the effect that evidence in CRCL RI 21 before the inquiry relates to the bats and the finding of dead bats in the tunnel, and that the police's wildlife crime officer has agreed to investigate the alleged offences. Mr. Feeney's purpose in sending this to me was to allow a judgment to be made by, separately, the police and by me as to whether continuance of the inquiry will prejudice a possible criminal investigation. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but counsel at inquiries have a general duty to provide legal advice, and so I turned yesterday afternoon, this was sometime after 3 o'clock, through the programme officer to Mr. Straker, who was working separately in the building, separate from me, that is. And his advice, as I understand it, was that no prejudice could conceivably arise because the document has no determining effect or prejudicial effect in any such proceeding, which would have to be decided on their merits, if any. Is that a fair summary of what you say, Mr. Straker?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So therefore, I intend that the inquiry should continue. Now, thirdly and finally from me is the controversial item of sitting times. I've changed, as you'll all probably be aware from what happened at the earlier parts of the inquiry, the normal sitting hours at inquiries are of the order of 10 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, with various breaks, and because of the change of venue and the extra distance involved, I decided at the beginning of the reopened inquiry, having had a short discussion in the inquiry session, to change the opening time to 10:30 in the morning, not to allow people to lie in bed for an extra half hour as such, although that might be a side effect, I don't know, because the way the buses run between here and either Lakeside or Summertown, it takes about 25 minutes less to travel here if you're aiming to get here by 10:30 on the bus, rather than if you're aiming to get here by 10 o'clock. So that's what I said, and one or two people agreed with me and nobody else said anything, so that was all right. What I left unsaid was what happens after that. Now, I did say that I would extend the sitting time proportionately somehow, so that the same number of hours are available to the inquiry each day. What I have in mind is to take a break for lunch at about 1:15 today and subsequent days, and if necessary to resume at 2 and to sit till about 5:15. So I think by that way we would still have the same number of sitting hours. Those who want to travel by bus would have the reduced inconvenience of getting here later than they otherwise would, and with a shorter journey time, shorter duration of journey time. And I think that would be an equitable arrangement. It would take a quarter of an hour off people's lunch hour, as it were. I'll mention this now so that anyone who feels distressed by that, or feels that it would be wrong in some way, can let me know now. Any takers? Yes, 10:30 to 1:15, and there'd be a break part way through that, about 12 o'clock. From 2 o'clock to 5:15, with a break perhaps at a quarter to 4. My assessment, and this comes off Travelline, which is a website produced by some informed, detached organisation, is that the bus service going back is pretty uniform. There's not much to be gained by the closing time or the adjournment time of the inquiry. There's a very healthy bus service. And anyway, I'm only a stranger here. But that's what I have in mind, and unless anybody objects fairly strongly, we'll carry on that basis. Good, well I'll take that as an absence of fairly strong objection. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. found on my desk when I came up here just now a bit of the Oxford Times for today, which has got a headline on it: high-speed rail link bid to take flight as threat to bats is lifted. I haven't read this. I don't intend to, unless somebody wants to put it in as evidence. I don't know who put it here, you see.
I just didn't know if you'd seen it or not, but I thought...
Well, I haven't. And it's not one of the things I'm supposed to do, I'm enjoined to do, is to stick to the evidence.
Yep.
I don't normally go off and read the local paper to see what's going on. I don't rely, but if somebody wants to put it in its evidence, then that's fine, I'll take it, of course. Now, today's business, has anybody else got any housekeeping?
I do on behalf of Natural England. It's just in relation to documents. You'll be pleased to hear that, like the other parties, Natural England's not been idle and has produced some further documents as well. What we haven't done is yet put those in. So there's 4 more, and I think it's appropriate to put them in now. So some copies are being brought up to you, and then for the other parties. And I have other copies that I'll provide to the programme officer in the break, so she can make sure they're put in the library and on the online system.
Right.
I could quickly go through those, or it might be.
Well, yes, please. Partly for the benefit of those who haven't got sight of the copy.
Yes, well, we do have some spare copies, and probably the best thing to do is to put a few spare copies onto the objectors table. As I say, there's 1 copy for them now. If you put a few spare ones there, then they'll have them. But the documents are in order. There's document 13, so OBJ 24613. That's just a chronology setting out the licensing history of what happened since the last inquiry and this inquiry in relation to bats. And it was really just expanding upon a certain paragraph in Mr. Hell's evidence. That's 3 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a note which is taken, a very recent document taken from Natural England's intranet, explaining the difference between conservation objectives for SACs, that's the European sites, and for triple SIs. Then there's the citation for Walbrook Meadows, the triple SI citation, that's document 15. That's one that, as far as we could tell, wasn't in the evidence already, so it's just to complete the evidence. I don't think any particular reliance needs to be put on it. And then there's a response to Dr. Robertson's rebuttal, that's document OBJ 24616, just covering some of the points that she makes in responding to those.
Right. Now, you'll be appearing, as it were, perhaps in about an hour or a little bit more than that, sometime this morning anyway. That gives some time for people who are interested in this to have a look if they've got access to it. How many copies how many people want to have the opportunity while Engage Oxford are appearing to have a look at this? Right. One for Councillor Gotch. Anybody else? Is that a yes, Mr. Feeny? Oh, you got a copy? Oh, well, there we are.
I mean, so we certainly have enough copies for, we certainly have enough copies for the objectors who indicated they wanted to cross-examine Mr. Earl, and some more, I think. So
okay,
if anyone does not have one, if they come and ask us here, we'll provide them with one.
Right. Good. So if anybody falls into that category and hasn't got a copy, see Natural England for details.
That's the question of clarification.
Yes, Mr. Feeny.
Document OBJ 246/15, triple SI citation. Should we confirm that that's the triple SI citation that's in there from last year? What's the date? No date on this one.
No, there isn't.
I understand it's a copy of the current triple SI citation.
Yeah, what my point is that there is a triple SI citation already in evidence. It's in the appendices to Mr. Coates' evidence of last year. I'm trying to confirm whether there is a difference between this document and the triple evidence.
perhaps Chiltern could let Mr. Feeney know that outside the inquiry, as it were, it's a matter of fact. Do you have anything else, Mr. Feeney, you wanted to speak before these appeared?
Yeah, I don't know if you covered it in your housekeeping, but I appeared in the Court of Appeal on Tuesday
No, I didn't.
in my attempt to quash the Oxford Court strategy. It was a hearing before Lord Justice Bill, renewal of my application to the Commission for Appeal. The application was refused by Lord Justice Bill. I'm cross-examining Natural England today, and I will be opening my case tomorrow. Tomorrow I will be submitting, as far as it's relevant, that the High Court judgment in Feeney was wrongly decided, that it is of limited authority because it is an interlocutory judgment, that it is inconsistent with existing authorities of more authorities, including Wells and Hardy, and that it was reached very curiam because Wells and Hardy were not cited before the High Court, although they were cited before the Court of Appeal. The judgment from Tuesday is not currently available. But when it becomes available, it's of very little authority because it's a Commission to Appeal judgment, and there is a practice direction that which is your counsel.
Right, well, thank you for that, Mr. Feeney. We'll hear more about that tomorrow, no doubt. Mr. Straker, did you indicate you have something?
Merely so to indicate this, that yesterday there was mention of the history of the railway and where that was dealt with in the evidence. And so the answer to the question is Mr. Alan Dare's proof of evidence, CRCL P2A, and in particular at paragraph 3.2.5 of recording the railway between Vista and Oxford originally being built as double track throughout.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything? Then let's press on. And we have first Engage Oxford this morning. Good morning. Chris.
Good morning, sir.
You've indicated you want to examine one of CRCL's witnesses, haven't you?
Mr. Fraser.
Mr. Fraser, that's right. Springing to life. Now, I imagine you'll be referring to his proof of evidence, the appendix and so on. Is there anything else I need?
Possibly the management operation mitigation policy. And do you have a copy of BS 6472? If you don't, I have a spare.
You do, sir, in CD 5.26.
Somewhere. No, I'll turn it up.
CD 5.26, sir. So you may, if you're in the mode of getting out documents from the previous part of the inquiry, also want to get out Mr. Fraser's old proof of evidence, because that's referred to in one or other of the documents that Engage mentioned.
Would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, of course. I'm Ruben Patton from 2426. I'm acting on behalf of Engage Oxford. Good morning. If I may, can I start with some points regarding vibration and Just initially, a point of clarification. In the noise and vibration mitigation policy, paragraph 210, you've referred to the situation where mitigation will be provided and the phase that will relate to. Can you just inform us, does that refer to each phase discretely or in aggregate?
Not sure I'm following this. I've got paragraph 210.
The noise and vibration mitigation policy.
And that refers to all of the phases together.
And you referred to British Standard 6472 in your proof of evidence and the noise and vibration mitigation policy, which in turn defines vibration dose values and semantics that occur to vibration dose values with various levels, if you like, of adverse comment. And you refer particularly to the semantics at which adverse comments are low. Can you just to let the inquiry know which levels they refer to as vibration dose values?
Yes, certainly. Let's go to the
It's page 12 of the 6472.
yes. Table 1, page 12 of BS 6472 shows shows 3 categories of the various probabilities of adverse comment assigned to them. With the numbers in the table are vibration dose values in the units that are stated. The lower category of the 3 is the one that's used in the noise and vibration mitigation policy. We've taken the values of 0.4 for daytime and 0.2 for nighttime as our values for the noise and vibration mitigation policy.
Okay, and you obviously accept that they are the higher, they are the values at the higher end of that semantic.
Well, yes, they are. The reasoning for taking those, though, is that anything lying within that category would be classed as having a low probability of adverse comment. And there's obviously a range in people's perception to vibration, which is noted in the British Standard, and hence a range is produced. But if one was doing an assessment in accordance with the standard, you would look at values up to 0.4 and 0.2 that would still be classified as a low probability of adverse comment.
But also the values of 0.4 and 0.2, as well as being at the lower end of the low probability of adverse comment semantic, are also the bottom end of the adverse comment possible range of values.
Well, they form the borderline between
the value.
Yes.
When we talk about significance and the concept of significant impacts, can you inform inquiry what for vibration, what you would define in terms of the vibration dose value as a significant impact?
Well, we have used in the approach to the environmental statement, where we're looking at significance, we've looked to a conservative approach, which is to take our assessment criterion as the low probability of adverse comment being the point at which significant impacts wouldn't occur. The basis of that is that anything below that category actually is stated in the standard as there being no adverse comment expected below that category.
category. There are obviously two categories that are higher than that before you get to a point on the right-hand side of table 1, where adverse comment is very likely, in fact, it's beyond the top of those three categories, where we would expect that to be the case. So I think we're drawing a reasonable line by taking the lower of the three categories.
So you're saying that significant impact wouldn't occur at vibration levels, vibration dose value levels up to 0.4 in the day and 0.2 at night?
That's the conservative view we've taken in the environmental statement, but I did note in your evidence that you suggested that even comments in the middle of those three categories would cause significant impacts. I mean, I think we've taken a very conservative view by taking the lower of the three, but even I think the levels somewhat in the middle of that higher category would lead to the residual effects which we've well, they're unlikely effects in the case of this scheme, but they would lead to effects which were not certainly at a point where adverse comment was very likely. In fact, there would be one category below that, so it's arguable as to whether that would be significant or not in that sense of category.
Okay, well that leads to my next question, which is that, again, paragraph 2.10 of the noise and vibration mitigation policy, and then also 3.9 of your rebuttal proof, you refer to the situation where the existing vibration level is already greater than the levels you've just referred to, the levels of quantitative significance. And you've said that an impact which is 50% greater than that would still be acceptable. So that, in theory, I think would push us into the middle range of the adverse comment possible semantic. Is that correct?
Well, the noise and vibration policy is designed to, as far as practical, mitigate to the low probability of adverse comment standard. That's enforced by the planning condition. There is also a proviso for unusually where existing levels are above the existing standards for a change in vibration magnitude to be required before mitigation is provided, which I think is a reasonable situation. There should be some material change to the existing situation before further mitigation is required. But certainly in the area, in terms of all the measurements that we've done to date, there aren't any receptors where we have measured vibration levels above those standards. So in practice, it's not a situation that arises, but I think it is right, and it's in common with other schemes such as Crossrail and other rail schemes where a change has been required before mitigation is provided in unusual areas where existing vibration is relatively high.
Okay. In an earlier version of the noise and vibration mitigation policy, you actually referred to a situation where the difference in vibration dose value was 100%. And in the final version, that has changed to 50%. Can I ask the basis on which that change was made, and also the basis on how you determined that a 50% increase was acceptable?
Well, the change was made in terms of I think it was during the conditions sessions at the end of the previous session of the inquiry, and it was raised as a point. I can't actually remember who raised it, but it was suggested that might be a little higher, and we're also reviewing it at that period of time as well. We agreed that, John Rowers agreed that in order to be brought in line with other precedents, it will be more rigorous to apply a change, a smaller change, and a factor of halving was applied.
That factor of 50%, there must be some technical basis behind that for choosing that particular number.
Well, yes, it's brought in accordance with other schemes. I mean, so you mentioned Crossrail as an example where 40% has been used, 40% has been used in other schemes as well, as I understand. The 40% is a value which is say a relatively common unit value. We chose 50%. It's of the same order. There's a lot of different things talking 50%.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to work out how that criterion actually protects the amenity of residents that fall into that category. And talking to someone this morning who lives in the quadrangle flat who says that vibration is I think he's on the second floor, and vibration is perceptible in his property when trains pass. So presumably on that basis, he would be one of those people that would fall into that 50% more is tolerable category. Do you think that is preserving his amenity?
I think he doesn't. First of all, he doesn't fall into that category, and we did do some measurements in the quadrangle house to look at the existing vibration levels. The monitoring results for those are listed out in the previous evidence, CRTL P9B.
Is there a spare copy of that? Can I ask what vibration levels you measured there?
Yes, certainly. We measured at night. We measured over several days and nights. The nighttime measurements varied from 0.2 to
Just coming across to you.
Sorry, thank you.
It's behind flag 3.
I'm playing in table 3.1. Page 3.2. We measured at two locations. Quadrangle house, may not be aware, it's got a basement level, which is semi-basement level, ground floor level, if you like, which is a car parking area, and then there are two residential floors above that with flats on them. So we adopted two measurement positions, one on the in the basement, and one at the top floor, the second residential floor, second story as we've described in the table. There have been some concerns whether noise would change as you go from the bottom to the top of the building.
Vibration.
Sorry, vibration. Yeah. And so we adopted those two measurement positions to see if that was the case. And we measured nighttime values at the second floor between 0.02 and 0.04. Similar ranges at the basement location. And then in the daytime, we measured 0.03 to 0.04. And in the daytime at the basement location, again 0.04. So they were much lower than the threshold values that we derived from BS 6472.
Sorry to interrupt you. Are these full day and night measurements?
They are, yes.
They are.
Yeah.
So the property was occupied at the time?
The property, well, the basement the property wasn't unoccupied. The basement location has very occasional vehicle movements, but the second floor flat was done in agreement with the resident, with the understanding that they would not interfere with the equipment and the operations. So when we have levels which were they're almost a factor of 10 or 13 below the criteria.
And were these measurements on the second floor taken in a room closer to the railway?
They were, yes.
Paragraph 127 of your proof, you state that vibration is not expected to generate significant disturbance at distances beyond 10 metres from the rail. Can you briefly explain the methodology that you've used to derive that statement?
Yes, of course, yeah. You may have deduced from the environmental statement that we did some vibration measurements of existing trains running on a section of track which had the typical traffic mix and types of trains that are going to be running on this line, including Chiltern Railways trains, and also that had line speeds that were comparable with the highest, which will be experienced along the with the new scheme in place. Those measurements were reported in the environmental statement. We need to go to them quite a moment, but they, in principle, the measurements were done at various distances over several train pass-bys in order to establish a good view of what the likely levels of vibration would be.
Was this the work you did at King's Sutton?
That's right.
Thank you.
And this was, these measurements were undertaken on similar freight trains that would be expected to use the upgraded railway?
Yes, I mean, the freight trains are, freight trains vary in their configuration and the type of freight trains that are on the network, but there were several measured in sample and typical values are obtained. In fact, we took the highest values out of the passenger and freight respectively and used those in the calculations to estimate the levels at 5 metres, 8 metres and 8 metres.
But obviously, there must be a tolerance associated to that measurement calculation when you apply it to a different site, given different factors, different railway, different trains, different ground conditions, etc. So do you accept that there is an error function that relates to that 10-metre statement?
Well, I think it was recognised in the previous session of the inquiry that you mentioned ground conditions. I mean, ground conditions are something that's usually looked at in detailed design phase, and in order to give confidence that those will be looked at in detail, there's a condition, condition 19, which requires a scheme of assessment to be put in place and to be authorised by the local authority and checked, so that details including empirical and calculation investigations are carried out to show that levels that have been put forward are achieved.
But the 10-metre statement on its own must have a error function associated with it.
And we've tried to be conservative because we've taken the highest of all the passenger trains we measured, we've taken the highest of the freight trains that we measured at the various distances. So we've tried to be conservative in that way. We've also taken, we haven't adjusted the line speeds downwards for some of the locations, particularly in North Oxford where you've got quite slow moving freight trains. The King's Sutton line is quite a fast section of track. It's in open country with trains travelling through on a flat section. So you've got quite high line speeds there, much higher than you'll have particularly close to, for instance, you mentioned Quadrangle House. On Quadrangle House, the freight train speed there is relatively low, it's between 30 and 40 miles per hour from memory. So they're quite a lot slower than the freight trains at King's Sutton, which were, I think from memory, about 75 miles per hour.
Okay. A couple of final points on vibration. You use the term practicable very frequently when you're referring to mitigation. Can you explain to us what mitigation of vibration in particular, and can you explain what a practical measure would be to protect residents from vibration, and also the situation that would occur when a particular measure is not considered to be practicable, why that would come about.
Certainly. Obviously, the starting point with controlling vibration from railways is to look at the smoothness of the railway interface. And we know that can have an effect on the vibration and the noise levels produced. So that's an important first point in reducing railway vibration, including the provision of continuously welded track, which is obviously kept in good condition. That the track at King Sutton is we thought representative of the sort of continuously welded track under the normal maintenance procedures the track is kept under for the main line. So we felt that was a reasonable representation of the situation that would occur. The other thing to mention is Cheltenham Railways have a wheel lathe of their own in a depot at Aylesbury, which they use to smooth the wheels, which means they don't have to wait for a third-party facility if there are any defects in the wheels on their trains. So that's an important starting point. Of course, track form is an important factor too that will be considered, and the very nature of a properly founded track form with ballast and appropriate subbase, actually, for a technical term, is it makes a difference to the vibration that's produced, and it will be compatible with the standards of the higher speed railway, which will be put in place. Furthermore, our measurements show that the property is only within the 8 metres, even based on higher speeds than will exist in some parts of North Oxford, are actually going to require any more than standard ballasted track. Even Quadrangle House is only 8 metres from the proposed track. There aren't really any in North Oxford that are closer than that. We did identify in the environmental statement a handful of places, largely former crossing keepers, cottages, etc., which are of the order of 5 metres from the track. We took note of that in the environmental statement. The levels at 5 metres are obviously shown in the environmental statement, but the likely situation that we believe will occur is that those will be it'll be possible to reduce vibration levels at those points using technology such as, and this hasn't been fixed because of course the work hasn't been done in terms of discharge and the conditions, but the type of technology that's commonly used on mainline railway lines is techniques such as underballast mats and the like. So a resilient layer is introduced between the rails and the possibly the track bed and the ground to reduce the levels. And our estimated performance of those based on the published data is that they would be sufficient to reduce the predicted vibration levels down to back into the low probability of adverse comment category.
So, can I ask, the measures you described, what's happened? My understanding of the conditions was that they're there to provide all measures that are reasonably practicable to mitigate vibration, and you just describe what those measures could be. What happens in the situation where there is an impact that is predicted or considered likely to occur, but the measures you described are considered not to be practical?
Well, I think well, yes, the requirement to go through a procedure of showing that what you've proposed is actually practicable is set out in 1912, condition 1912, which is in copy of that.
I was referring really to actually rather than the procedure that follows, actually what the impact, what it means for the people living in those properties. an impact is predicted, but the measures to control the vibration for whatever reason are not considered practical. What is the residual impact? How does that affect those individuals?
Well, in the worst case, as I say, taking into account, based on our data, taking into account the worst case comparisons, the higher speed trains at King Sutton, and I should say not taking into account some of the factors that would be taken into account in the detailed investigation, which would tend to reduce vibration levels in general, such as transfer functions into buildings. The comparison would be the worst consequence would be that vibration, of course, would be perceptible as it is now, but that the category which the vibration levels would fall into would be the adverse comments possible category MBS 6472, which is again coming back to table 1 in 6472 is the one above, the low probability of adverse comment.
So it's fair to say that in that situation, residents there would be there's a reasonable likelihood of perceptible vibration and potential loss of immunity as a result.
I don't think the two things necessarily go hand in hand, or in fact I know they don't. None of these standards is set to avoid perceptible vibration. The standards are set to avoid significant levels of adverse comment. I think it's clear from the research that these standards, once we have to perceive the vibration for there to be an effect, so they're linked in that way, are set not to avoid any perceptible vibration. So we certainly wouldn't claim, I think, that as with any other promoter of a scheme, claim that by adhering to the stringent standards in 672 that you wouldn't ever feel vibration.
I accept the distinction between the two, but if the conditions require you to quantify, to undertake a measurement exercise within a defined time period after completion of the railway, if you did that and or somebody acting on children's behalf did that and quantified that, the vibration impact was causing a degree of loss of immunity. Are there any other measures that you could then implement to improve that situation for those residents?
Well, that would have to be looked at in accordance with the conditions, and the inspector rightly mentioned that the planning conditions do require. 1912 says that the situation may arise in which the developer finds not reasonably practical the provision of mitigation measures that otherwise would be required by the policy. In such circumstances, the mitigation measure or an equally effective substitute previously approved in writing by the local planning authority shall be installed in the timescale set out in 110 of the policy, unless the local planning authority has confirmed in writing its agreement that the mitigation in question is not reasonably practical and that there is no suitable substitute. So that would be the process which would be followed there.
The residual impact is still that there could be an impact on a group of residents, number of residents as a result, which could lead to loss of immunity. And do you accept that could occur if you have vibration levels which fall in the mid-range of the values under the BS 6472 adverse comment possible?
Well, to bear in mind that the standards we're setting are based on the ideal standard, if you like, or certainly an optimal standard based on the lowest the thresholds that are in the standard. It's not obvious to me that there would be a very high probability of adverse comment.
But it could happen.
There could be adverse comment. There could be adverse comments today. I think vibration comment is
on the basis that it could happen as an absolute backstop last resort measure. Do you not think that? Sorry, I'll step back a stage. Do you agree that vibration is more likely to be created by freight train movements than passenger train movements?
Create vibration. Freight trains tend to give rise to high instantaneous levels, but then there are fewer of them. So in terms of the VDV, we need to consider both both factors.
Okay. But as a backstop measure, a last resort, when everything else has been considered and engineering measures are considered not practicable and there is an acknowledged degree of impact at a number of properties, do you not think that reducing the speed of the freight train movements would improve the situation quite significantly?
Well, I think you have to set out reasonable standards. I don't envisage that situation occurring here because of the data we've gathered and the worst case comparison
There is-
we've done.
Even if it's a 1% chance, there is still potential for that situation to occur.
Well, the situation that would result would be that the levels would not fit the ideal or the optimal standards that they're being designed to be at, but they wouldn't be, in my view, unacceptable, and the number of properties affected would be very, very small, and in general the effects of the scheme would be perfectly acceptable.
Do you not think it, because of the uncertainties, do you not think that it would be, rather than, and I appreciate it's been discussed previously prior to my involvement, but do you not think it would be reasonable to keep the option of a speed control for freight train movements just in case that 1% occurrence occurs?
I'm not sure that speed restrictions are practical in railway terms, in terms of the operation of the railway. It's not my timetabling around freight movements is not really my specialist area. It's probably an answer that we better addressed by Chiltern Railways, but certainly that was a subject of quite close scrutiny at the previous session of the inquiry, and there were reasons given for why it's not as easy as it might appear to reduce the speed of trains on tracks, particularly since they're part of a network which has to work as a whole.
My recollection is that the debate that was had in the earlier part of the inquiry was very largely about passenger trains. There were operational reasons within Chiltern relating to the need to turn the train around and get it going back to London and the time it would take to get from Bicester to Oxford and turn round, that precluded in Chiltern's submission the imposition of a lower speed limit on the trains than is proposed. I don't remember, stand to be corrected on this, I don't remember much discussion about freight trains, nor do I remember any evidence that freight trains could be subject to a separate speed restriction regime to passenger trains.
My understanding is that it wouldn't be a practical measure to apply speed trains for passenger trains. I mean, that's glaringly obvious, but for freight trains, my understanding of freight train operations is that they are timetabled to an effect, but they tend to have windows of time in which they pass through, and therefore a speed limit on a relatively short section of track shouldn't really, I'm no expert in this, but shouldn't, in my view, from my understanding I do have, shouldn't really adversely affect their operations.
So something perhaps comment in detail on that, but certainly in terms of the working that we did, there are physical restrictions on the line that mean that freight trains are relatively slow through the North Oxford area. They come across a junction called North Oxford Junction, which has to be negotiated pretty slowly, and so the speeds generally are between the order of 30 and 40 miles an hour as they come through majority of North Oxford.
Okay, all right, let's move on. Sorry.
Well, my understanding is that it's about a mile or mile and a half from North Oxford Junction up to Woolwich Tunnel, the Devon Drive area, presumably the accelerating of them.
Will there be some change in speed, but they have to they're quite long. So by the time the back of the train has cleared the junction, the front of the train is some distance along the track. So it tends to just be a naturally limiting factor there.
Would that acceleration have an impact on vibration?
Not the acceleration, as far as I'm aware. I haven't seen any evidence on that.
Okay, I appreciate time's pushing on. A couple more points that I want to just run through very quickly, if I can. On the issue of conditions, my understanding is that, perhaps you can confirm this, is that the conditions will be discharged by the local planning authority, which obviously for the North Oxford region is Oxford City Council. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And the technical elements, the noise and vibration elements, which we're talking about today, presumably the planners at Oxford City Council will be utilised by their colleagues, their environmental health colleagues. Would that be right as well?
It's not quite as straightforward in that it's a more advantageous situation than that, in that the conditions require an independent expert to be appointed to review the proposals for mitigation.
So that independent expert would be appointed by, are you saying that they would be appointed by Oxford City Council, or they would be appointed by Chiltern Railways?
It's in condition 9, 19.9, and 19.10, one for noise, one for vibration.
My understanding is that the independent expert would undertake the necessary calculation, measurement, analysis, etc., provide a report which would be submitted to the local planning authority, and they would then be responsible for discharging it. Is that right?
Submitted schemes are required by the yes, that's right. It would be an independent report.
So in terms of the checking of that work, the report that is submitted to Oxford City Council, the technical checks, that would be their responsibility. That would be the responsibility of the independent expert. Because the independent expert provides the report, which is then submitted to them, which they check and then discharge.
They would presumably have their internal quality procedures of internal checking, which would be between their colleagues and themselves. I don't think there's anybody acts entirely alone.
It seems to me the condition's quite clear. The difficulty is that submitted schemes of assessment shall show which Chiltern or their contractor or somebody on behalf of the railway will submit, shall show how the standards of noise mitigation will be set out in the policy will be achieved. There will be supporting calculations, printouts of inputs and outputs from recognised computer software. This is in the case of noise. So they've got all that.
I understand.
And then an independent expert audits that.
That's not my understanding.
Well, that's what it says here. Each scheme shall be accompanied by a report prepared by an independent expert previously approved in writing by the local planning authority on the robustness of the noise-related elements of the scheme of assessment.
My understanding, sir, is that report is written by that independent expert.
Yeah, that's right.
And it would then be down to the local planning authority to check the accuracy of that.
Check.
Well,
There's the design, there's the report on the quality of the design, and then there's the city council reaching a view as to whether or not
the point
design is okay.
The point I'm trying, that's right, and the point I'm trying to make is that would you not agree that with greatest respect to environmental health officers, their experience of engineering of noise and vibration from railways in particular is extremely limited. So their capability and their resources to actually verify these studies will be extremely limited.
I think that's the purpose of the condition, is to assist the local authority where they may feel they don't have that expertise, so they don't bear the cost of that independent advice.
That isn't how I see it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I see it that an assessment is provided on behalf of Chiltern Railways to say, right, this is mitigation considered, these are the engineering calculations that go site along with it, this is the resulting impact. Is this acceptable, yes or no? That goes to the local authority check it and take a judgment.
No.
But in order to check it, that is a technical process,
Yes.
and they need to have the relevant resources and competence to be able to do that.
No, I think you're missing the step there that the proposals for mitigation are produced in 1910, then each scheme is accompanied by a report prepared by an independent expert, previously approved, etc., on the robustness of the vibration-related elements of the scheme assessment. So, so there is that independent expert who looks at the proposed mitigation scheme.
Give us a second to confirm. We'll move on. We may come back to that if that's okay. Okay, just briefly on other conditions, 1902, 1980, and 1911. In my own proof of evidence, I've said that measures should be in place to demonstrate by measurement on completion of the railway, commission of the railway, that the performance standards that you've signed up to or complied with, and in your request, you've said yes, there will be, and that's detailed in the noise and vibration mitigation policy. Just going back to the issue of resources at Oxford City Council, would it not be more transparent and straightforward for those monitoring requirements to be laid out clearly within the conditions rather than in a separate document?
I think it's quite normal to refer to noise and vibration mitigation policies in schemes such as this, partly because the level of technical detail you might need to set down in a document. It doesn't lend itself easily to being transferred into a condition. In reference to the noise and vibration mitigation policy, in the conditions actually covers a lot of ground and make sure that the general principles of that policy are applied scheme-wide, so that it comes down to an assessment of individual receptors in the way that's intended.
But the residents, obviously, the residents are potentially vulnerable to any, well, a better phrase, anything that Oxford City Council may miss as a result of that. And clearly, if that requirement was put into the condition, then there's less chance of that being missed. So the residents really are vulnerable to how Oxford City Council choose to enforce and discharge these conditions.
I'm sure they'll do an appropriate job. And I think that aspect has been dealt with in Mr. Gilder's evidence regarding the duties of the local authority to perform their duties in terms of investigating potential noise issues in their area.
Okay. One final point. Although we may come back to that previous issue. Throughout your proof of evidence, you talk about mitigation. Well, you talk about to make the statement mitigation being provided is much more generous than statutory requirements. Can you just explain what those statutory requirements are?
Well, yes. So in terms of noise, we have the noise installation regulations. In terms of vibrations, there are no statutory regulations to provide vibration mitigation or to achieve particular levels. So by consequence, the policy is imposing a standard on a developer which wouldn't be imposed on another developer if condition 19 wasn't in place.
So are you saying that if the only mitigation that you've offered was that's required under the noise insulation regulations, the residual impact of the scheme would be acceptable? Well,
clearly the policy is designed to go beyond that and look at increases in noise and exceed some more stringent thresholds than that. So clearly the position is that's not the intention.
But the point you make throughout your proof is that we're doing much more than we need to. And so what I'm saying is, if you didn't do more than you need to, i.e. you just did what's required of you under the law, would the impact be acceptable in terms of the potential for loss of immunity?
I'm not sure that's quite the question you were putting to me, was it? My statement was about the statutory requirements, and the statutory requirements are as they they are, and there isn't any statutory requirement to provide mitigation, vibration mitigation for railways. So, and with the noise, we're going beyond the statutory requirements that exist. So, I'm not quite sure.
But the point that is implied in your proof is that you don't have to. You're saying we're doing this, but it is an implied point. I accept that, but you're saying these are the statutory requirements, but we're going much far beyond that. So that implies what I'm saying is if you didn't apply the additional mitigation that you proposed, would the impact be acceptable in terms of amenity?
Well, I only meant the point to put into the regulatory context, if you like, where we're operating here. You know, we're in UK with the statutory requirements that we have. That's what I meant by that point.
I would agree, certainly if I was an advocate, which I'm not, that I would be pushing for an answer on that question. But we'll leave it there.
Acceptability and significance is dealt with in the environmental statement and other documents, so that clearly has been accessed to more stringent standards that are in the statutory regulations. But certainly I think it's worth noting that as a general point that the statutory requirements actually don't provide a limit of vibration, and a limit is being set through the conditions. So I think the condition is quite effective and is more effective than the statute. Okay, thank you.
That's all from us, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any re-examination, Mr. Straker?
If I may, just a few questions, if I may. Could I, Mr. Fraser, first ask you about the point that was raised with you in connection with CD 1.29/21, which is the noise and vibration mitigation policy, and in particular, the point arising at paragraph 2.10, page 8 of it, where the contemplated circumstance is of a property which already has an element of vibration getting some further vibration in consequence of the scheme.
Yes, that's right.
And this is then put in threshold terms, the thresholds being recorded in those bullet points in 2.8.
That's correct.
Are there any such properties presently which are beyond those thresholds in consequence of vibration at the moment from the railway?
No, from the data we have, we've measured at the closest of the properties to the track, there are none of those were above the threshold. In fact, they were quite considerably lower than the threshold.
If there were such a property, and the vibration level is increased by 50%, then what happens in relation to mitigation?
Well, then mitigation is provided where practical and required by the policy, and through the condition, the practicability of that will be assessed.
And I appreciate that we are here dealing with a hypothesis because no such property has been identified. But if there were such a property with practicable mitigation, what end result is achieved for that property by way of the VDV, the vibration dose value?
Well, that would be brought back down into the low probability of adverse comment, or below the threshold that are set out, which correspond to the low probability of adverse comment category in the British Standard.
So can we just take that in steps then? If we look at the day threshold on 2.8, we know that there are no such properties, but the threshold is 0.4. And So if we contemplate in the hypothesis a property which is at 0.4, so a property is at the threshold, the VDV then increases by 50%, so we go up to 0.6.
Yes.
The mitigation occurs. What then is the result in the light of the answer that you've just given me in numeric terms?
Well, that number, if the VDV goes up by up to 0.6, it falls within the
Because I'm thinking now about the post the mitigation, Mr. Fraser.
post the mitigation. Yes, even with fairly conservative estimates around the likelihood of reductions from mitigation, we would expect somewhere of the order of a factor of 2 reduction in the VDV level, the magnitude of the vibration.
And that's on a conservative basis.
That's on the conservative.
And if one steps outside that for a moment and looks at what's reasonably likely in that hypothesis, and one appreciates it's a hypothesis, what end figure are we getting to after the mitigation?
After mitigation, that would reduce by a factor of 2 to 0.3.
So below 0.4.
That's correct.
And in that circumstance, once again appreciating the hypothesis behind it, but in that circumstance, has the property which is presently at the threshold been moved to below the threshold?
That's correct.
Thank you. Now, I want to ask you, please, about some questions about the freight trains, and you would ask some questions in connection with that, which touched upon the question of speed, and others have given evidence in connection with the speed which is here obtained. I just want to know these points, please, or to be reminded of these points, please. In terms of freight trains at the moment, are they presently running on the track?
Yes, there are some freight trains running on the track.
Do you know whether or not in the scheme, phase 1 and phase 2A, there is any uplift in the number of freight trains on the track?
Yes, I know that there are no foreseen increases in freight trains as part of those parts of the scheme.
Thank you. Now, you had a series of questions which touched upon a circumstance which drew attention to a matter which was unexpected, but was the hypothesis behind the question was that vibration mitigation was going to be impracticable.
So I remember that.
I wonder whether you could help us, please, in this regard, by taking the environmental statement, volume 2, chapter 6, which is CD 1.16. I'm grateful to you getting it out, sir, and it might be useful, sir, if you kept this to hand for the balance of the session. 1.16, sir. demonstration of practicability. Very much so.
Do you have this? Sorry? Do you have CD 1.16?
It's the relevant chapter of the environmental statement.
Yes, I have the.
Okay, so you can follow the question. That's all. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. If we go, please, to page 6-61, we will see a section headed vibration 656. You have that, Mr. Fraser?
Yes, I do, yes.
And reference is there made to the methods of mitigating train vibration to avoid significant impacts being identified during detailed design.
That's right, yes.
And you'll recollect that you were asked and questioned a little while ago about means of mitigating train vibration. I think that at the outset of your examination, a reference was made to keeping your proof of evidence of the previous element of this inquiry to hand. Did you, in that proof, outline some further means by which mitigation can occur? If you take that and look at 3.31,